I'm Paul Hoffschmidt, founder and CEO of Alpha Sophia, and this week I'm joined by Steve Atkinson, founder and CEO of ChestPal, and Helena Binetskaya, founder and CPO of ChestPal. Thanks for joining us today in our podcast. And maybe let's start by you just telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey, how you ended up in your founding roles at ChestPal.
Okay, should I go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so Steve Atkinson. It's been quite a long journey. I started out in medical devices, 21, worked 10 years in J&J, involved in leverage management buyout, managed to then get involved in kind of entrepreneurial turnarounds, startups and so forth. I've been involved in 3 strategics, big companies, J&J, GE and CR Bard, which is now owned by Becton Dickinson. And sort of, about 7 startups or turnarounds along the way as well. And the latest one is this one, and I was a pleasure to be asked by Helena to join her on this journey.
Right. I'm Helena Binetskaya. My background is in software development and quality assurance, and it was my personal kind of family situation that led me to creation of the company.
Yeah, thanks for introducing yourself. I mean, you touched it already, Helena, a little bit, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the founding story of ChestPal, how you actually decided to work on that product and on that mission, and then finally, which led you to then found ChestPal and team up with Steve.
Right. So 7 years ago, my daughter was 5 months old at the time. She was coughing badly for weeks, and I took her to a family doctor, then to a specialist, a pulmonologist. Both asked me about her symptoms, listened to her lungs, but what they heard with their stethoscopes was different. They arrived at different diagnosis and treatment plans, and the pulmonologist, as you might expect it, was correct. So at that time I learned that lung sounds matter, they impact diagnosis and treatment, but they may be hard to reliably differentiate for those who aren't the experts. And so that gave the idea of a smart stethoscope. I actually have the product right here, that would be trained to detect lung sounds with an accuracy of expert pulmonologists. And I sought out incubator funding to develop the product, verify it, validate it clinically, complete all the regulatory filings. We trained our algorithms using a large database of sounds labeled by a panel of expert pulmonologists. And so now everyone can benefit from their knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, talking to different founders in the MedTech space, I think having a story where you had personal experience with a therapeutic path where a device would have been helpful at that time, I mean, that always leads to, in my opinion, companies which are really mission driven and always have the same North Star compared to other ones where it's just, I don't know, by accidents of finding a technology and then just building that without that background. Just from a personal perspective, do you think like having that experience in the past is a bigger motivator or also driver for the journey of your company to make it successful compared to just, I don't know, financial incentives?
Oh, 100%. We are extremely mission driven, and like personally, I'm sure Steve and the whole team shares the sentiment. But yeah, it has a huge impact.
Yeah. I think, Steve, when we first met in Dana Point earlier this year, and I actually also held the device in my hand, I mean, it was already the way you were talking really showed how passionate your whole team is about your product. And I have to say, just from touching the device and holding it in my hands, it's just super well designed, super light and slim and sleek. So congratulations on building that product. And you're now on the path to actually start commercializing it in the coming years on European, but also on the US market. You then decided at some point to partner up with Steve, who has a lot of experience in the medical device sector, as you just mentioned, Steve. How did you actually meet, the two of you?
Oh, it was at the LSI conference in February. It was the last conference, I believe, that I attended before COVID lockdowns. And Steve was presenting there, and we met. If I remember correctly, we met in an elevator, and I asked you like, "What brought you here?" And then we stood in the hallway for like over an hour now. Is Megan Steve all sorts of commercial-related questions because he has such a wealth of experience. And later on, I invited him to first be a board member and then come in as a CEO.
That's really cool. I didn't even know there was some similarity in the way we both met Steve.
Yeah, I know.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
That elevator
Small world.
pitch.
Yeah.
Maybe before we dive into the more commercial parts of the future of ChestPal and how you're tackling that, maybe let's dive a little bit deeper into how the technology works and how it differentiates against other legacy solutions, and what your unique differentiator in that market is.
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the I guess kind of almost like the second part of that question first, if that's okay. So how we differentiate against legacy. So legacy in this field is really the stethoscope. I mean, it's been out for hundreds of years, available. It really hasn't changed much over the years. It uses a diaphragm which vibrates, which sends sound waves up directly to your ears. There are now digital versions of that available, which have like an amplification, but they just listen and record sounds. You can listen, record, and share, and that's the kind of where the state of the art is very much for listening to lungs. So how we differentiate from that? Of course, we also listen to the lungs. We have digital amplification, and we actually detect sounds, and I'll let Helena explain a little bit more in a sec about how we detect those sounds. But we detect specifically, that means categorize the sounds. We detect crackles, wheezes, and rhonchi. And crackles are caused by the fluid on the alveoli. As you breathe in, the air gets released from the alveoli, and it causes this popping and crackling sound, and it settles back down again. That's generally associated with inflammation, and that immune response to an infection. And so if it's in one specific part of your lungs, that's a really strong indicator that you have a pneumonia present. And of course, there are other symptoms and so forth the clinician takes into consideration. If those crackles are all across all the lower lobes of the lungs, then it's a strong indication that there might be congestive heart failure. So, that's kind of what crackles do. Wheezes, high-pitched wheezes are the strongest indicator for asthma, and deep wheezes, which we call rhonchi, are more normally associated with COPD or bronchitis. So, we're detecting the sounds which specifically help the clinicians are trying to hear, basically. And because the current technology of stethoscopes, they first of all, it's very difficult to hear with a stethoscope, and no one really argues with us that it's difficult to hear these sounds, because these sounds are very subtle, particularly the lung sounds, and hard to hear. And because they're so hard to hear and so difficult to categorize, and therefore the categorization of the sound is the main step to diagnosing the patient. That, if you can categorize it, that helps you diagnose the patient. So it leads to a lot of subjectivity and relatively poor performance. And our device, the key differentiator here is not only are we amplifying, making these sounds easy to hear, recording them, enable people to share them, clinicians to share them with each other, but also our performance, according to the clinical evidence, is also kind of the best in the field versus just a clinician doing this without ChestPal. How it does it and so forth, as I said, I'll hand that over to Helena to lead you through that. If that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So our software algorithm, it is a patented system and method to classify the sound. ChestPal Pro software first converts the lung sound recordings into spectrograms, and then it allocates those spectrograms into the designated classes, normal and abnormal. Specifically normal, wheeze, crackles, artifact, and heartbeat. and it does so using the neural network algorithm that was trained on that data set that I talked to at the very beginning. And as a result, what the clinician sees on the screen of their app is the classification of the lung sound, also the visual representation of the lung sound in the spectrogram. And there's been third-party studies published that confirm that seeing a spectrogram increases clinicians' ability to correctly interpret what type of sound that is. And also the audio, which is the actual sound. Plus, of course, there is the sharing capability, which helps with, say, seeking advice from a senior colleague or adding those records to electronic health record system. So this is the technology in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I can imagine gathering that initial data set to train your model on is quite difficult to get a hand on that. How did you manage to overcome that chicken and egg problem of having either first and then actually starting training your algorithms on that?
Right. So data is, and we'll most likely talk about that later, is so tremendously vital for any algorithm development, especially if it's a neural network development. And you are correct, it is very hard to get around collecting the data set, specifically for lung sounds, because they're, like, within the state of the art, you do not have clinicians routinely saving lung sound recordings into electronic health records or any system. So you have to create that database from scratch yourself, and then not only have sufficient number of records present, but also label them using the expert knowledge. And what we did is we had a panel of pulmonologists labeling this data, and if same record received the same label from all pulmonologists independently, then that was the gold standard label that could proceed into our training and test data set, because we had to make sure that all the experts are, like, definitively in agreement of what that sound is. In terms of how did we manage to get to assemble this data set, that's my ethnic national background might come into place. I was born and raised in Belarus and had connections, well, as I started working on the product with the local community of pulmonologists. And that's how we were able to get the data set and the label data set in an extremely affordable way. I honestly do not believe that it is feasible to do so in, say, Western countries.
And now in the future, when your product is in the market and being used by pulmonologists on patients all over the world eventually, will that then also help to further improve and further improve the algorithm by gathering further data, having more labels, and then referencing that and continuously improving the algorithm? Is that something that is built into your model?
Of course, that's also part of your standard post-market surveillance when you monitor the performance of your product in real-life settings. And then you use, which we have also done, you use the real-world data to further improve the performance of your algorithm in, again, real-life settings, because they do tend to differ from, like, strict clinical controlled environment. We actually went through those cycles, some of those cycles already. And one of the evidence that our algorithm performs really well in practice is one of the papers that we have published in European Respiratory Journal, which is one of the second highest ranking journal in respiratory in the world. where we looked at over 300 COVID-19 patients with associated pneumonia, and we had 94% sensitivity, 97% specificity in detecting lower respiratory tract infection in those patients, much better than, off-the-shelf products that people typically use, like pulse oximeter or whatnot.
Just to clarify on that, we detected the crackles in the lungs associated with those pneumonia, and then the further tests in the clinical trial, which were part of the protocol, validated the fact that yes, there was a COVID pneumonia on those patients, and so we were very pleased that our thesis of detecting and identifying these sounds helps clinicians identify helps them identify the conditions at the end of the that they're looking for. That's a great paper. I would also like to mention, and Helena touched on the patent, and I'll let Helena describe it in a little bit more detail here. But one of the reasons that our product performs so well is not only the custom data set that we generated to label, to have pulmonologists independently label, but also we did uniquely pre-training for pattern recognition in our algorithm. And we have a granted patent by the EPO specific to that, and we're at kind of sort of the iterative stage at the moment in the US with that. But I'll pass that back to Helena to maybe explain. But just the reason I mention this, by the way, is because over time we will see other technologies evolve and people try and catch up to us with what we're doing, I'm sure. But it's incredibly difficult to do this because, as you're aware, if you're going to train a neural network algorithm, you typically need hundreds of thousands or millions of data points to get it to be highly accurate, like ours is. And without that, then you have to go and gather that unique data set yourself. And if we see someone in our field, having a detection, and we look at their detection data, typically you'd publish, or you'd have to, or you can see the 510K data or whatever. When we analyse and look at how the data performs, if it performs similarly to us in terms of its high performance, then that will certainly raise suspicions about the way that anyone could possibly do that. That short of getting millions or hundreds of thousands of lung sounds to do that, how else would they do it if they're not going to infringe our IP? But I'll pass that back to Helena. Sorry, Helena, to drop this on you.
That is a valid point. I would say probably maybe not 100,000, tens of thousands, but it is equally as hard. It's very hard to gather and to label correctly the lung sound data set specifically. In terms of the technology that is covered by the patent. The approach that we used was to take an existing neural network architecture that was pre-trained on ImageNet, which is a huge data set of images, and then fine-tune that neural network using our proprietary lung sound recordings that were labeled by the expert pulmonologists, so that the original network is already trained with high efficiency to determine basic shapes like curves and lines and changes in the direction, and then knowing those basic shapes and being trained to recognize those in the spectrograms of lung sound recordings, we can arrive at our high sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy across the 5 classes that we detect.
And we are publishing this in an American journal, actually. So that's up and coming. So we're not hiding anything from anybody in terms of how we do it. But we do know that we've got protection on the way that we do it. So it's cool.
Simple question. Can you afford to have a rep in every county, or do you need to be hyper-targeted in your outreach? Do you need to know information about your targets going in to be successful? Or do you have years and years before you want to close that deal? If you want to be focused, if you want to deliver fast, you should visit alphasophia.com and help your sales team out.
Maybe looking a little bit further down the road when it comes to introducing your products to more and more markets, launching in the field. Maybe you can share a little bit what your current status regarding commercialization is and what your plan for the future is, what your next steps are, to get a bit more understanding about that part.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of where we're at now, we've got we're US focused primarily. We have the product in other markets as well, but we're primarily focused in the US. We have a program at the moment, kind of what I call our pioneer program at the moment, which is then going to lead us to early adopters Q1 next year. Revenue generating during Q1 next year. We have some modest revenues already, but we haven't really pushed yet. And then moving from our seed capital stage, which we are at the moment, to a Series A, which will then enable us to scale and access those other markets. Ultimately, we can, we know that we can make a major impact. So, for example, there are already some pilot users of the device in Kenya. There'll be some more in other sub-Saharan African countries as well, where pneumonia is a major cause of mortality. And if you can detect crackles in the lungs, that's a strong indication. And with the other symptoms that a patient might have, you can access those patients quickly and treat them quickly and really make a difference to the outcomes, patient outcomes, and overall health outcomes in those countries. So it's not just a US or a European typical medical device play, although it's a major part of our business. And we also believe that we can really make a genuine difference to people's lives around the world.
When acquiring practitioners for your pioneer program you just mentioned in the US, how do you address practitioners who may not want to try and adopt new technology? Or are you currently focusing on the more innovative early adopters anyway, or what's your plan towards that?
Yeah, we tend to focus in different areas. They are all pioneers. They're all interested in adopting. They're all interested in giving us feedback. Of course, we're deploying at some scale now in the US, and there are a number of good things that we get from that as well. We can, with any new digital technology as it enters the market, although we haven't been hit by them yet, we're anticipating there'll be a few bugs and so forth as we see we get these regular updates on our laptops and software, constant evolution and improvements and so on. So we'll see where we can make improvements, where we can make fixes and so on. But also we'll be able to see, how many detections, what the learning curve is to detection, the types of detections people are seeing, get some feedback. Everyone's who's pioneering is agreeing to give us feedback on this, so that we can use that to learn in anticipation of the bigger scaling of the company. So it's really that point in our journey. So yes, they're all pioneers. These people, but they sit in different areas. We've not got all one customer type of pioneer, so we've got them across numerous clinical areas and numerous clinical what's taxonomies. If you think about you'd have family doctors, RNs, physician's assistants, paramedics, there's a whole home health, senior care, there's a whole wealth, and we're looking at each of those, so that we've already got the pioneers in each of those areas that I've mentioned. We have pioneers using our device, so it's a pretty exciting time for the company. And that thing that you mentioned earlier on, about the authenticity of the company and the mission that we're on, this fire in the belly that Helena's got to to really make a difference. I think that we're seeing that now, and we're seeing the product go through this commercial evolution, which is pretty exciting for the company.
Maybe to go maybe on a little bit higher level, from your learnings at ChestPal, but also Steve, from your learnings at past companies, what do you think are the biggest challenges when launching new medical devices to market?
Oh gosh, it's really there's numerous, right? I mean, first of all, you've got to make sure your product performs well. So getting the design right, and the software and the firmware, hardware, everything needs to be optimized. That takes time, effort, and capital. So obviously, number one, first and foremost, is capital when you're going through seed stage. But if your product doesn't perform, it won't get adopted. The other barrier associated with that is at the end of your cycle of product development. Part of that involves a major piece of work of validation and verification, and again, that enables you to get through a regulatory process and prepare your files for regulators and audits and so on. And having a quality system in medical devices, we have to have a quality management system, ISO 13485, which everyone's familiar with. It's a piece of work, and everyone works in the company to that standard, and so on. So there's that product performance regulatory element. Then the next challenge, I suppose, for most medical device companies would be getting the medical community to endorse that, to endorse your technology. And you can see the phase we're at with our pioneers. That's part of our program, is getting medical community endorsement, not just from key opinion leaders, because key opinion leaders are not average clinicians, right? You need average clinicians to also endorse your technology, so that as well as key opinion leaders, so that people can relate to the types of users that are, and the types of results people are getting with your device. And as you set out to do this, you've got that question of reimbursement. What's your commercial model? How are you going to get paid for this product? And you need to resolve that fairly early. Certainly, obviously, you're not going to launch and then figure out what your commercial model is, right? You tend to go through regulation, and as you're going through that, you're trying to figure out how you're going to get paid. Is it reimbursed? Is it not reimbursed? Is it private pay? Is it part of a bundled DRG or kind of thing? And then as you get to market, you need to think about your people and your organization. And for us, at the moment we're a tiny little startup, but I anticipate later this year, after we've completed our Series A round and we get to scale, then we've got to look at organization. We've already got some commercial people in the US and commercial partners in the US to help us unlock the various levels of customer that you need to. But as we go forwards, what is our go-to market? We have that. We know what our go-to market is, but you need to get sorted out as well. And to be honest with you, early days, there can be a lot of test and learn. And I think we've gone through some test and learn, and all companies do. And in every company I've worked in, we always go through that sort of test and learn phase. Is this working? No. How do we adapt? And then go again, and so on. And that's the process. So I'd say those are the major things that we need to, challenges, if that's right word, that we need to overcome.
Yeah, for that last part, when it comes to commercial, when it comes to go to market, it's always the question: how do you actually get the attention of those busy doctors at scale, to then be able to actually have them listen to your approach, to your technology, to what you're offering with your technology, and then being able to gather that mass endorsement for your product, and lighten the fire a little bit, for it to become for it to just distribute itself in the community eventually. Maybe going back to ChestPal, and we were already talking a little bit about your approach being US first, but being launched in the UK, having data sources from Eastern Europe and so on. How does the technology of ChestPal or the product fit into the current and evolving state of Western countries and their healthcare systems, which differs between the US, differs to Europe, but also within Europe it differs quite a lot. So how do you think your technology fits into that?
Do you want me to take this, Helena, or would you?
You can start.
Okay. Yeah. So I think you've got to have, it's no good having a product which doesn't really solve a need. A great idea. There's lots of great ideas waiting for great markets, right? And so we looked at the markets, and then and Helena's, the fact that the pain that Helena encountered in getting a reliable sound detection to lead to a reliable diagnosis, that indicates the need for this sort of product. And so what is this pain causing in the market? Well, it's causing, if you take Western markets, which you've mentioned there, Paul, it causes excess cost. You've got a lot of unnecessary presentations to EDs because clinicians who can't hear these sounds don't really know what they've not received that guidance from their stethoscope as to what's really wrong with it. What is this respiratory condition, or is there one at all? So they often refer their patient to the ED. And in a survey we did, in the US market, we found that around 60% of clinicians regularly refer their patients to the ED. And it's not just a fee-for-service thing, which is very much a US, but it's also because they genuinely can't hear. So by fee-for-service I mean there's that revenue generating. It's a part element of healthcare in the US, and it's not that, it's because they can't hear. So you've got these unnecessary presentations, and then you've got unnecessary hospitalization. So ultimately, if you can keep people out of hospital, that saves cost. And I think one of the challenges that we've got is this growing burden of boomers and Generation X and so on. Everyone, this getting to this, we're all aging now, and causing pressure on health systems. There are just not enough hospital beds, period, right? There's not enough in these markets. So you have to keep people out of hospital ideally, or or make sure that they're not referred in, and help clinicians. And that's really what we're doing. And, we've got, in the US, there are 34 million chronic respiratory sufferers of respiratory disease, and more than 10 million respiratory-related visits to the ED every year. So effectively, you can avoid a lot of those. And in fact, I think we have a paper that we dug out which says there are 13 million preventable respiratory adult and inpatient stays in the US. So that gives you an idea of the scale of the market and the actual cost of that. It runs into billions every year of excess or wasted cash and wasted time, and it's all results in suboptimal patient outcomes, right? I mean, if you can detect the sounds and detect the other symptoms at the front line of care, you can deliver the treatment the patient requires, which stops all that onward journey and that cost. So that's primarily, and the other thing, as I mentioned, because of this kind of bulge in the demographic of aging people, it means that less highly trained clinicians are expected to do these tasks because there are just not only are there not enough beds, there's not enough doctors, right? So now physicians' assistants are trained to auscultate, listen to lungs, auscultate, and heart, and a lot of registered nurses already do that. You've got numerous levels of clinician now having to do these roles that were once the exclusive domain of the clinician, of the physician. So they're still clinicians, but they're not enough. So that's kind of where it's gone, and that favours us as well, because you don't really need to be a highly trained clinician to use ChestPal. I mean, it's so easy. It tells you where to place the device. It tells you what you need, which button to press. It instantaneously gives you the result, and if you're not sure, you can share that result. You can share the spectrogram and the sound with a colleague to help you interpret it, and they can listen to the sound just like you can, and a record's created. So I think that's kind of how we're tackling this. I don't know whether I've answered that particularly well or not.
Yeah, so from my understanding, there's one component where ChestPal just introduces a great amount of extra efficiency in the healthcare systems by avoiding false ED referrals, by and then also on the other hand having just more reliability when it comes to the diagnosis and then the subsequent treatment of patients. And maybe that's an oversimplification, but I think those are two very big buckets ChestPal is and the product ChestPal is introducing to the market.
Yeah, and I think in future, we've not gone through this regulation yet, but when we do, then patients will be able to help better manage their own respiratory conditions as well at home with this product. But for now, we're focused on the clinician market.
But also to take it to the global scale, right? Steve presented the US case, but we started our conversation talking about the mission-driven companies, and over 52% of our planet's population do not have access to any sort of advanced diagnostics or healthcare providers. So, and what ChestPal can do, and that overlaps as well with the US case, but becomes especially prominent for, say, low to middle income countries, is it can be used to equip frontline healthcare providers, or maybe, as Steve says later on, families themselves, as a reliable tool for the detection of lower respiratory tract infection. So, for example, we're working with Adventist School of Medicine in Rwanda, and when its students are going to come back to studies in April, I believe, they will be using ChestPal Pro to when they go out to the rural communities to auscultate the patients who are presenting with respiratory problems. And as Steve mentioned at the beginning, in sub-Saharan Africa, pneumonia is the leading cause of death, in particular in children under 5. So that kind of touches me on a personal level. So I'm really looking forward to hopefully helping detect more conditions earlier, which would lead to better patient outcomes and less deaths.
Yes, and thanks for sharing that outlook also on a wider level, even though the American market for the moment is in the focus. I mean, your ambition is to make the product available eventually to all patients who can benefit from that across the globe. Maybe looking back at your journey, and we talked about that at the beginning, we have a lot of other MedTech startups and founders listening to this podcast. What are some lessons you've learned so far, which you would give to other MedTech founders from your personal journey over the course of the last years?
It will take a very long time. It's like this years for overnight success story. It's actually years. When I sat at one of my first conferences and listened to the keynote speakers, and they were talking, they were reviewing the regulatory landscape and the commercial landscape and how long it takes to take the device to the market. And they mentioned something like 5 years for kind of low risk, mid risk, up to 10 years for high risk. And I'm like, no, we're going to exit on year 3. Like, no, it's been, 7 years since we started development. So it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, because and a lot of it's down to funding, right? I mean, it's this seed stage companies is really this for me. I've raised money for very large companies. Well, if you add it all together, I've raised, over the years, it's over 500 million. A lot of money, and the hardest raise of all is seed, in my opinion. because the risk profile of a seed company is higher. You know, you don't have your clinical evidence, you don't have your product performance, you just have an idea. Who's going to fund that idea? You know, you need to align someone with that. And then at each stage, well, you know, there's always a reason to say no. And I think investors get so many hundreds a year of propositions, decks, whatever, to them, that it's a challenge to get funding, and it's a challenge to differentiate yourself somewhat in the market, to demonstrate you've got something you know, genuinely unique. And I think in our favour, you know, the market, its size is so large, relatively accessible, and we've been through the mill on those sort of that phase that Helena mentioned, you know, all those that early stage that's taken all those years. We've been through that, and we're right on the brink now of just you know, we know exactly what we're doing. We know what we've got to do. We've got the pioneers, we've got the adopters, then we've got a Series A, and then we've got full scale. So we know what's happening with the company. It's very clear to us how to get from where we are now, which is probably, you know, I don't know, something like G to to M. You know, we're at that stage down the road. We're not A to B anymore. But we know what we've got to do, and everyone's fixed on doing that. But I think wide-eyed founders can often go into this going, this is going to be easy, you know, I've got this, and everyone's thinks they've got the very best idea in the world, and everyone thinks the same thing, right? So it's an eye-opener when you go through all this. And I'm lucky enough to have been a way back when sales rep and a product manager, and particularly as a product manager, you really learn these things. Even when you've got a product, let's say you've done an acquisition in a strategic, even then it can be a challenge to launch the product in the marketplace and get it going, you know, and really grow it. So yeah, and hats off to Helena and you know, engineering for getting the product to stage it's at, I'd say.
But speaking of, one practical advice that I would give to medical device founders, I know that budgets are tough and they are sometimes non-existent, but it is extremely important to get a highly experienced regulatory person on your side, not necessarily on your actual team, but as an advisor perhaps, who would lend you several hours of their time per month, or give or take, because that advice could be so crucial in how you define your commercialization as well as the product development. It can change what markets you're going into. It can change what type of audience, like user type, you're going after. Is it consumer or is it a professional? Is it going to be the US market or the EU market? How are you going to define the scope of your product? We try to do it on our own first, but then we learned how impactful it can be to sort out advice from extremely experienced people who could be, their billable hours could be very high, and you have to accept that because it's not high in comparison to how impactful that is for the company. So definitely find such a person early before you start product development.
Yeah, because you have to have all your files kind of aligning to the regulation as you develop the product. If it doesn't, you're going to have to go back and start again, which is crazy. So start it early.
It is crazy. Start it early.
Maybe one last closing question, making the outlook for the time ahead. What's going to be your main focus in the coming months at ChestPal?
Yeah, so I think this is probably a shared one because we've got some tech and we've got some commercial stuff. Obviously, as I've mentioned a few times now, the future for us is getting to the Series A and scaling. We project that the company will fairly quickly become profitable based on the go-to-market model that we've got. So, you know, building some commercial traction ahead of the Series A, building our pre-money valuation. I think for founders, one of the things that's to know is that, you're trying to get your look after your existing investors when you go to a larger round, and you do that by increasing the value of your company so that you don't dilute those early investors as much. And that's really the process that we're going through right now is to demonstrate certain metrics that'll increase our pre-money value, that'll get our A out the start gate really easily for us as well, and a big enough A to make it so that we don't keep having to go back to the market for more capital and become profitable, and drive profitability, drive scale, and then like any high performing company, we'd expect good things to happen to the company and choices at that point in time for the company, but our short-term mission is kind of clear there. And we also have some tech stuff we're doing along the way with a kind of a seed budget. It's tricky, and Helena's leading numerous tech developments as well at the same time to really position us in fairly short time frame as the most comprehensive digital stethoscope in the world.
Digital stethoscope.
Really.
Yeah, great. And I'm really excited to continue to watch your journey and see how your company evolves, how you go through those different stages, and then find that group of first pioneers, go on to the early adapters and so on, and scale ChestPal. It's great being on your side in that phase. It was a pleasure having you on the pod today. Thanks very much for joining, and looking forward to having you back maybe in a year or 2 years when you've hit the next milestones, and you can tell us a little bit how that journey continued to be. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Paul. Pleasure.
Like it or not, you're in a fight for physician attention. And in this fight, you'll want to leverage best-in-class targeting data, 360-degree profiles of every target, omni-channel outreach, and so much more. Great MedTech sales teams don't want to work without Alpha Sophia anymore. Visit us at alphasophia.com and learn more.